Good evening, and welcome back to another night of shared stories and quiet adventures. Tonight, I'll tell you the story of Irish mythology and folktales, a tapestry of gods, heroes, and spirits that once walked through mist and moonlight. These are the tales that shaped Ireland, whispered across centuries by firelight and rain. I've always loved these stories, and I think you might too. There's something about them, the way they balance wonder and sorrow, the way they feel half real, as if they could still be happening somewhere beyond the hills. If you enjoy nights like this, please leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it always makes me smile. Now, make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, and let me take you back to a time before time, when the world was still young and Ireland was born out of mist and magic. Before the first path was cut through bracken and thorn, before the first hearth sent its smoke into a cold sky, there was an island that woke to music. It rose from the Atlantic like a green thought, shaped by wind and tide, and wrapped in a veil of cloud. The ocean spoke to it with patient breath, and the island answered in stone and river and oak. In that young world, the veil between the seen and the unseen was thin as a mist over water. To cross, it took no more than a quiet heart and an open ear. Three presences walked the high ground and named what they saw. They were Eriu, Banba, and Fodla, sisters in spirit, queens in all but crown, the very soul and soil of the island given voice. Where Eriu stood, the hills rose as if they wished to see her better. Where Banba looked, the rivers curved with gentle courtesy. Where Fodla spoke, the light in cedar and ash grew warm. They were not makers in the way a smith is a maker. They were more ancient than iron and more tender than wheat. Their gift was blessing, and the land kept it. Time moved as the tide moves. It brings gifts, and it takes away. The first to answer the call of that new shore came in coracle and timbered boat, peering through sea spray as if through the wrinkles in a wise face. Partholon led them, a man of ambition and rough laughter, who could read the weather by scent alone, and whose dreams ran farther than the wake behind his vessel. His people landed on a coast that was as clean as an unmarked page. They set their hands to the page at once. Under Partholon, the land learned the weight and purpose of the plough. Fields opened in brown furrows. The first cattle were led to grass that tasted of salt and sun. Houses rose from timber and sod and rang with stories at dusk. There were feasts and songs and weddings, the sound of pipes at dusk, and the smell of new bread cooling in the doorway. The island was pleased. It held them, and they held it. Yet the sea is a fickle nurse, and fate is an older power than craft. A plague arrived without a herald. It did not gallop in like a champion, but crept like fog through the hollows. Partholon's people faded like speech that is not answered. He stood by his dwindling folk with a face that grew older by the hour, At last his voice was only a breath over the graves of his kin. The island, newly loved, fell quiet again, keeping their story the way tide pools keep a perfect copy of the sky. After a long hush, Nemed came from the east with another people who had salt on their lips and hope in their hands. He was a solemn man who knew that power often comes with a bruise. His followers were cunning at sea and stubborn on land. They raised forts on crags and learned the inland rivers like a shepherd learns his flock. For a time the world opened to them, then the dark edges of it moved closer. From the old chaos that the island remembered only in its bones, there rose the Fomorians. They were a crooked kin born from cold water and storm cloud, cruel as a cliff and patient as winter. They did not build, they did not bless, they took. They came with oars that struck the sea like black wings, and with eyes that regarded men as a hind regards grass. The Nemedians fought them as men fight the night with lamps and stubbornness. They won some high stones and lost others. In the end, the weight of grief pressed the heart of the people flat. Many of the Nemedians fled. The island, wounded, waited once more. Out of that scattering came two branches that would matter. One would be called Firbolg, weary but fierce, who had carried heavy burdens in far lands and now returned with iron in their blood and memory in their stride. The other would remain hidden a little longer, learning the arts of wind and fire, the secret names of birds and the ways of the stars. The Firbolg arrived first. They were not daunted by rain or rocky shore. They shared the land among 5 provinces and set a king in each as you might set a candle in a dark room. Their justice was plain spoken and their feasts were honest. They were not a people of subtle riddles, but of oaths well kept. For a while the island belonged to men who knew the ache of labor and counted that ache as a friend. Then came a ship whose sails looked as if the dawn itself had been cut and sewn. It did not move like a thing of wood, it moved like a promise. On the prow stood a company whose faces were lit by a light that did not come from sun or torch. They were the Tuatha Dé Danann, the children of the goddess Danu, bearers of skill and art and mind. Their knowledge was a treasure chest with no bottom. In their hands, harp and spear and healing all answered their names as if they were living kin. They stepped upon the shore, and the land felt it as a harp feels the pluck of a string. Nuada was their king, a figure both bright and grave, whose gaze was as clear as spring water over stone. Around him came masters of every craft, Ogma, who could pull a weight with a word, Goibniu the smith, who forged without flaw and poured ale that sent sickness out by the door, Dian Sect, a healer whose hands knew the old language of bone and blood. They brought treasures that were not trinkets, but truths given shape, a spear that always sought the right place on the field, a stone that cried out the name of the rightful king, a cauldron that never sent a guest away hungry, a sword that required no flourish to do its work. The Firbolg met them on a plain called Mag Tuaired, a field that still remembers the weight of that day in the lay of its grass. The children of Danu did not laugh, and the Firbolg did not tremble. Each side looked on the other and saw a mirror that had been given a different sky. The battle that followed was not wild chaos, but the stern music of fate fulfilled. The clash of shield on shield, the thunder of feet, the breath of men as they counted their lives in heartbeats. Nuada fought with calm precision, and the Firbolg fought as if standing between their children and the sea. In that strife, the king of the children lost his hand, and with it, for a time, his right to rule, for a blemish was a shadow on the crown. Yet the day went to the children of Danu, and the Firbolg took their sorrow into the hills with the dignity of a people who know that loss is not shame. They withdrew, and the land shifted around the new lords as a horse shifts its weight beneath a new rider. For a season the children of Danu were untroubled. Then the old dark rose again in the salt spray. The Fomorians came as if they were the memory of fear given flesh. They demanded tribute that tasted of humiliation. They stood at the harbours like statues carved from threat. Into this shadow stepped a champion, and his coming was like the breaking of weather. Lug came to the court with eyes that had seen many crafts, and hands that had mastered them. He could join beams so they sang under a roof. He could play airs that made grief forget itself. He could throw with a precision that carried the will of sky and field into the arc of a single cast. He asked for entry and was refused by one gate and then another, until the door that admits only excellence in everything stood open and waited for him. When he entered, the hall felt larger. Nuada, newly whole with a crafted hand that was bright as morning, gave him leave to speak and to act. Lu did not thunder, and he did not pose. He simply stood as if the ground he occupied had always belonged to him. In the councils that followed, the children of Danu put aside pride and fear and listened to the quiet undertow of hope. The second battle of Magtwyred arrived like a storm that had been waiting just beyond the horizon. The Fomorians brought a terror that had a face. Bala came, whose eye was a furnace door, whose glance could fell a grove. He was ancient as the first gale that ever broke a mast. His very presence opened silence like a wound. On the other side stood Lug, light against shadow, clear air against choking smoke. They fought as time fights with forgetfulness. In that struggle, Lug sent a spear that travelled as if guided by the will of the island itself. It struck the terrible eye and turned it inward. Bala fell, and the sea seemed to breathe for the first time in an age. The Fomorian line shattered like ice under a sudden thaw. Their ships fled with sails slack and hearts empty. On the field, the children of Danu stood while the wind laid down over their shoulders like a friendly shawl. The price of victory was still counted. Nuada fell in the ruin of the clash, noble to the last. The kingship passed to Lug, and the land accepted him with the calm we give to the right answer when it comes late but sure. The children of Danu prospered under a justice that was both sharp and kind. Crops came in with a full sound, and music was not an ornament but a way of keeping the world in balance. Yet there is a law that no art can unwrite. Ages move. Magic does not vanish. It changes its address. The children of Danu began to step sideways into the deep places. They made homes under hills where quartz threads shine like frozen lightning. They taught the streams to keep counsel and the hawks to carry news along the ridgelines. They did not depart. They learned to live inside the island the way a song lives inside a harp. Men returned to the coasts and the glens, to the lakes where the mountains admire themselves. They came with hunger in the good sense of that word, the hunger that builds and keeps. They raised kings and courts and laid down laws. But in every doorway at dusk there was a glance toward a hill that looked a little too smooth and a little too green, as if it were listening. The pact that had been spoken in battle and sealed in the quiet after became the truth beneath all truths. The upper world for man, the inner world for the children. Each would honor the other, and the land between would hold the memory of both. Look closely at an old standing stone, and you will see marks left by fingers that were never quite human. Listen to a river at night, and you may hear a name that no one has spoken aloud in a century. Taste bread in a house where a story has just been told, and you will understand that food is not only for the belly. This is how the first age ended in Ireland, not with the closing of a door, but with the opening of 100 hidden ones. When the clamour of the last great battle had faded, and the ravens had taken their counsel on the stones, there came a quieter season, like the long breath after thunder. The children of Danu stood in that calm and knew that the world had turned. Their champion had broken the old terror, and the sea no longer dreamed of chains. Yet victory does not end a story. It opens a door to rooms no one has yet explored. Beyond that door waited the age that would lead the old gods inward and call mortal kings into the light. Lug ruled with a grace that needed no boast. He walked the halls of Tara with the ease of a man who understands that power is a task more than a prize. There was warmth in his speech and a steady watchfulness in his gaze. He honored Nuada as a father in wisdom and as a companion in the memory of loss. He set the great craftsmen to their work, and the air of the island rang with hammer and harp in friendly strife. Goibniu forged without flaw and poured ale that drove sickness away like an unwelcome guest. Diensect taught the quiet grammar of bone and blood to any healer whose hands were patient enough to learn. Ogma shaped words that could pull a stone as surely as a team of horses. Music, craft and lore moved like deep streams under fields where barley stood up straight and proud. The people did not live on bread and iron alone. They feasted on stories as a house feasts on firelight. In those bright days, the Dagda kept a generous table in every season, and his laughter shook rafters. He would tap the haft of his great club on the threshold, not in menace but in greeting, and the floor itself seemed to approve. He had a harp with a voice of its own. When he called to it, it sprang to his hand with a sound like a flock turning as one bird. Its notes could summon summer out of a cold morning and send winter to its rest without complaint. When he wished, he could set joy on the lips of a weary room, or cool tears from a heart that had forgotten it was still human. Among women of the children there was Brigid, whose flame was learning itself. She presided over poetry and medicine and the mysteries of the hearth. She taught that a house without song forgets its own name. She blessed cattle and wells and the small, unnoticed work that keeps a world together, the turning of a spindle, the cleaning of a blade, the care of a book, page by page. In her presence, people remembered to be gentle, which is a finer strength than the raw pull of the arm. At her word, the first smiths and poets and healers walked the fields with a sense of purpose that did not depend on applause. It was in that age that Lug's foster mother, tale to you, who had spent her last strength clearing the great plains so that crops could grow, lay down beneath a coverlet of leaves and did not rise. She gave her life to the land as a candle gives itself to light a room. Lug proclaimed games in her honor at the place that bore her name. Men ran until breath burned like honey. Women raced their chariots with faces set and wild with joy. There were trials of strength and of wit. There were oaths spoken so cleanly that even the wind paused to listen. Handfasting couples vowed to stand together for a year and a day, then meet again to confirm their path. That festival would return every harvest with the scent of crushed grass and apples in the air. Even in later ages, when the children stepped aside, the people remembered the games as surely as they remembered their own summer birthdays. In every contest there was a salute to Teal'c, who made a field from thorn, and to the king who would not let her name fade. The children did not forget the cost of victory. The Morrigan, who knows the ways of fate like a shepherd knows the fold, went to a river and washed armor in waters that ran black for a time. She sang a prophecy in a voice as old as bog oak. It was a song that did not promise ruin or comfort, but the truth that all bright things pass into shadow and then into a new kind of brightness that cannot be worn like a brooch or a crown. Those who heard it understood that the age of open wonder would not last forever. Wonder would hide itself in new forms. It would haunt doorways and hedges. It would enter dreams. It would glow under hills like a coal waiting for careful breath. The years turned. Angus, the Dagda's son, tricked his kindly father out of a home that was dear to both. He asked to stay for day and night in the great house on the bend of the Boyne, where the sunrise finds ancient white stone and blesses it. At dawn on the day after, when the Dagda called for the keys, Angus answered that he had been promised a day and a night, and that together they are the whole of time. It was clever, but not cruel. The Dagda laughed, and the house found its master. In those halls, swans wheeled on winter skies, and lovers kept faith across strange changes. The stories began to bend inward toward chambers where the air remembered incense and salt and young laughter. Bod Durg was chosen as king of the children for a long season. He reigned in the west among lakes that hide their depths with a mirror of sky. Under him the courts of the seedy ordered their affairs with courtesy and a patient pride. The children did not vanish. They learned a new way of being. They found the thin places and made them doors. They shaped mounds that were more than graves, for they were houses for an age that would not be seen by noon light. The stones at Newgrange and Noath and Douth kept their own counsel. In winter the sun would reach in like a careful hand, and the earth would answer with a glow that felt like memory itself. The pact grew out of this new habit of the world, the upper land for men under the sky, the inner land for the children under the hills. Between them there would be traffic of dreams, spells of luck, and warnings given in the rustle of hawthorn. Men came again to the coasts with their ships dark as crows against morning. They were not the first to try, and they would not be the last. Among them were those who traced their story to a far city of towers that looked out on a western ocean. Breogan built a high watch on a shore that breathed the same long breath as Ireland. On a clear winter night his kin saw the shadowed shape of a land that seemed to be a thought whispered by the moon. Ith, learned and curious, sailed to see if a dream had taken on soil. He stepped ashore in Ireland with a small company and an open face. He praised what he saw without envy. He climbed green heights and spoke to kings with courtesy. The children received him with a guesting that had courtesy on its lips and caution in its eyes. Some say that envy bit their hearts. Others say that fear of change made their hands cruel. Ith died on his way back to the sea. His blood fell into grass that would remember his name. The sailors carried his body back across the waves with grief gnawing at their purpose. At the feet of Breogan's tower they told their truth, and a fire rose in the family that grief alone cannot kindle. They swore to return, not for revenge measured in blood alone, but for a new home measured in generations. Millesbane himself had already taken his last voyage into the mystery that all men must face. His sons swore on his memory and on the horizon. Aber, Finn, and Erimon gathered ships and warriors and women who wished to stake their lives on a green promise. Their brother, Emergin, a poet and judge whose words were not ornaments but tools, stood at the prow with curls blown back and eyes set on a line where sea married sky. They carried their dead with them, because a people who forget the honored lost become strangers even to themselves. They put out into a sea that offered its back without kindness or malice. The children watched from headlands that still hold their outlines at sunset. As the ships drew near, the children took counsel. They had ruled in the light. They had stepped into the hills. They saw a tide that could not be turned with spears alone. They chose to meet craft with craft. As the Milesian fleet rounded the coast, a mist was called up, thick as wool, and a wind that had no name pushed against every sail. The fleets drifted like dreams that cannot find a shore. Emergin stood among his kin and felt the murmur of the world in bone and sinew. He did not lift a weapon. He closed his eyes and began to speak. He named himself as part of all he wished to move. He called on wind and wave and stag and hawk and the deep mind of water. He did not command. He remembered aloud the kinship of things. The sea listened. The wind turned its head like a hound recalled by a whistle it loves. The mist thinned, and the coast stepped forward from its own secrecy. The ships moved as if the ropes that held them had been cut. They came ashore at a river mouth, where the sand tasted of promise and salt. There were scouts and skirmishes, faces bright with sweat and wary respect. There were parley and pledges, words shaped by men who knew how easily a tongue can break a man and a man can break a promise. The children sent 3 kings to speak at Tara, Mac Quill, Mac Checked, and Mac Grain. Beside them stood 3 queens, Eriu, Bamba, and Fodla, who were not ornaments but the durable soul of the land. Emergin, Aber, Finn, and Erimon went to meet them. On a hill that has felt many vows, the leaders looked at one another with that old unease that comes when 2 truths meet. Each side wished to claim the island. Each side felt that the island had been promised to them by effort, or by birthright, or by blessing. The queens did not argue as ancient poets might argue over a point of meter. They asked a question that went down to the root. They asked whether the Milesians would honor the land not as a treasure chest but as a mother and a teacher. Imogen answered that they would, and the queens asked for a pledge. If they gave the island to these men, the men must speak her name with respect as long as they drew breath. The poets would not forget Eriu, nor Bumba, nor Fodler. The men agreed. Then came a condition. The children asked that the strangers return to their ships and sail out past 9 waves, then turn and make the landing again if fate allowed. It was a trial of fairness as well as strength. The Milesians kept the letter of the request. They returned to the sea with the taste of grass still on their tongues and the sight of mounds like resting beasts in their minds. Out under the turn of gulls, they took their bearings and looked toward the shore they intended to call home. The children of Danu raised a storm from the belly of the world. The water rose up as if it had remembered an old anger. The wind grew teeth, the masts shrieked. For a day and a night the ships clawed at the currents like swimmers thrown far from safety. Emergin stood on the deck with the rain scouring his face. He called again to the deeper kinship that had answered him before. He spoke of the house of the sea and the way a river carries its wisdom into the ocean without fear. The storm relented, not as a foe defeated, but as a king who sees another sovereign and bows. The sails filled with an honest wind. The ships turned, and the bows bit the green edge like first teeth. The Milesians came ashore in earnest. There were battles on ridges where gorse tears the ankle, and in glens where the streams run like silver thoughts. The children fought with skill and with a sorrow that did not blunt their blades. The new men fought with a belief that had no room in it for retreat. At last, both sides knew the truth of what the Morrigan had sung by the river. An age was closing. A new one insisted on its place. It was Emergin who found the law that both could bear. He stood before Bob Derg and the lords of the children, and before Eber, Finn, and Erimon and their captains, and he said that a single land can carry 2 peoples if each will keep the world that suits them. The sunlit fields and the open rivers and the law of noon would belong to the sons of men. The halls within earth, the light that has a secret at its heart, and the kingship of midnights where stars lean low would belong to the children. There would be crossroads, and both would learn them. There would be gifts, and both would remember to say thank you. There would be warnings, and both would listen. All swore to it. With that pact sealed, the children stepped into their mounds and closed the bright doors behind them with a grace that made even their foes ache. They were not gone. They were everywhere the eye is not sure what it saw. They played in the corner of sight like small flames. They braided luck into horse manes. They hid in thickets to watch weddings and funerals, because both speak the same language to an immortal heart. The Milesians took up the work that never ends. They made a seat for kings at Tara and set the stone that loves to speak. When the rightful ruler stood upon the Liafal, it cried out like a gull that has seen its mate return. They cleared fields without anger, knowing now that the first clearing had cost a queen her strength. They loved music as men love clean water and bright weather. They held assemblies where poets could shame a prince and smiths could win praise equal to any champion. They counted cattle and fostered children and built causeways over places the bog would prefer to keep for itself. Eberfin and Erimon divided the island for peace, one ruling south, the other north, a settlement noble in intention if not in long result. For power is a cloak that grows heavy, and brothers sometimes find that even affection cannot carry its weight. The story of their families wound in and out of battles and marriages and songs. In those early years of the mortal age, there were feasts lit by tallow and torches, and bright news that crossed the island faster than any rider, because news strapped to story travels in a manner not bound by roads. On cold evenings there came strange visitors to the outer doors of farmhouses. A woman whose cloak had more light than any dye could account for would ask for shelter with a smile that could not be refused. A man with the scent of hawthorn about him would step over the threshold and stand very still, as if speaking with someone only he could hear. They would share a meal and then take a cup into the dark, leaving a small charm on the lintel that kept colds from children and wolves from cattle. In spring, a white cow would wander out of the fog and stand by the gate until someone kind opened it. In autumn, a harp would be heard where no harper sat, and the youngest of the house would wake with a song in his throat that he would sing until old age with more gratitude than understanding. The island began to keep 2 books. In one were written the names of kings and the dates of battles and the weighing of laws. In the other there were no dates and few names, but there were paths a man could take if he found himself lost, and ways to ask for mercy when pride had made a fool of him. In the first book, the hand of man grew firm. In the second book, the hand of the children guided the line. At Tara, the Milesians polished the customs that would make a nation. They learned that the land itself chooses a good ruler as much as any council does. In bad years, the Leofol said nothing, and men looked at one another in the silence with hard eyes. In good years it sang, and the cattle calves were fat, and the poets grew insufferable with success. Sacred fires were lit on hills that could see one another, and messages ran on light from rim to rim at Beltane. There were seasons for war and seasons for arbitration, and a man who broke the peace season learned that shame is a sharper goad than a spear point. As the sunlit order of men took root, other stories grew like night flowers that open when all the sensible blooms are asleep. Under a barrow near the bend of the Boyne, Angus kept a court where time did not move in any way that farmers would approve. Lovers went there to make vows that no bishop would recognize and no family could break. By a lake in the west, a woman waited in swan shape for the lover who would know her by the patience in her eyes. In the hills of Munster there was a hall where music took material form and danced with the guests, leaving footprints on the floor like frost. Lugh himself, bright among bright, grew quiet as the human world found its voice. He did not complain. He had always been a friend to craft, and there is no craft more difficult or more necessary than the keeping of a people. He looked upon Eberfin and Erimon and saw not rivals but heirs of a promise that he himself had helped to seal. He taught in dreams and in the twitch of a hand that finds the right line for a roof beam on the first try. In time, as ages do, he stepped into a place where the sound of the sea can be heard without wind. Yet when a boy practicing with a spear finally felt the line of his throw travel from heel to finger in one clean arc, it was Lugh who smiled in a hall no eye could see. So the island lived by 2 clocks, One was the pulse in the neck of a plough horse. It was the rhythm of seasons and sowing and the tally of debts, the counting of guests at the door and cattle in the byre. The other was the breathing of the mounds and the long patience of quartz veined through bedrock. The second clock did not care about noon. It cared about dawn and twilight and the edge of a fog bank where an older world waits to be asked its name. It is told that Emergin went out alone at daybreak once the pact was made and stood by a river that had recently chosen a channel and was pleased with itself. He put his hand in the water and thanked it for letting his ships come home. He spoke softly to the long grass and to the small spider who was setting a line between two stalks with a courage that would shame warlords. He thanked the land for letting men hold it so openly. Behind him, in the hedge, something breathed that was not a fox or a man. It was a listening that had weight. Emergin bowed without turning and went back to his people with the knowledge that the bargain would hold as long as men kept their courtesy. That is not an easy thing, but it is the only thing that works. In the nights that followed, storytellers began to shape a new kind of tale. Animals spoke, stones remembered, trees leaned in when lovers made choices that would cause ballads to be sung in winter. In those stories, men and women were brave and foolish and wise by turns. They made kingdoms and ruined them. They learned that no victory is worth anything if the old singers cannot bless it. They learned that strength loses its way without mercy. They learned that mercy alone will not hold a border. And behind every lesson there was a rustle from under the hill, not in mockery but in goodwill, as if old hands were steadying new ones at a loom no one had finished yet. Thus ended the open reign of the children and began the broad day of men. The gods accepted the inner halls. The mortals took the roads and the ploughs and the chronicles. The island did not become less. It became more. In time other heroes would stride out of Ulster and Connacht, with hearts like bright coins and fates like storms. But that is a later song. For now the pact holds. When the sun stands high, men rule by the laws they have made together. When twilight comes, a door just beyond sight opens on hinges that make no sound. In the north, the earth holds a ring of embers where once a royal fire burned. The place is called Emain Macha, a stronghold set like a jewel in green fields. It took its name from a woman who ran like a deer and left a curse like a winter. Yet before the curse there was a court that tasted of mead and iron and law. At its centre sat Conchobar Mac Nessa, a king whose will could still a crowded hall. He had taken the throne by clever pact, when Fergus Mac Roich agreed to lend his crown for a year while tribute was gathered. The year ended and the crown stayed where it lay. Fergus laughed as one laughs at a trick well played, though later his laughter soured and his sword found service in a different land. For a time, though, the red branch of Ulster rode out beneath banners that flashed like blades in clear water. Stories gather around kings as starlings gather at dusk. They tell of Conchobar's mother, Ness, who won respect with both wit and quiet steel. They tell of druids who marked the boy for fate with the sort of prophecy that makes even a confident father grow modest. They tell of the early feasts when poets in fine cloaks wove praise and warning together so closely that no one could separate them. In that hall, loyalty was a currency that did not rust. Champions were judged by courage and speech alike. A man who could not keep his word would find the benches grow narrow and the mead grow thin. Beyond the ring of the Red Branch there lived a farmer named Culan, who kept a great hound the size of a winter hunger. One evening he set a feast for Conchobar and his chosen men. The king and his riders came at dusk, and after them a boy with a hurling stick and the sparkle of destiny in his eye. His name was Setanta. He had a habit of leaving others at his back while he ran ahead to see what the world would dare him to do. When the boy arrived, the gate was shut and the hound unchained, for Culan believed his guests were already safe by the hearth. Setanta met the beast in the dark. The boy's aim was true and his nerve was like a drawn bow. When the men came running with torches, the yard lay quiet and the hound lay still. Setanta stood with the candor of youth and said he would serve as Culan's dog until a new hound was trained. In that moment he took a new name. He would be the Hound of Culan, and the word Cuchulainn struck root in the island and has not been pulled up since. The boy grew into a figure that outpaced stories meant to contain him. His training took him across the sea to a shadowed coast where the warrior woman Scarthach kept a school that smelled of peat and iron. She taught him the science of the body and the mathematics of war, how to read the human heart by its breath and the river by its sound at dusk. From her he gained a weapon with the odd grace of a sea thing, a spear that opened like a flower upon entry and closed upon exit, a trick the poets preferred to leave half described. He learned courtesy as well as killing, for Scarthach believed that a champion without measure is a calamity. He left her island with a friend at his side, Ferdiad of Connacht, who would one day stand opposite him at a ford that still remembers the taste of their blood. While Cuchulainn trained and returned, the North wove fate for itself through its women. The tale of Macha begins with a proud lord who boasted of the speed of his horses. He drew a pregnant stranger into a race for the amusement of his court. She ran because he could make her run. She won because she was Macha and because justice runs faster than pride when it finally rises. At the finish she fell to her knees and gave birth to twins. Between the cries of her children she set a curse upon Ulster that would not tire. In the hour of direst need, the men of the Red Branch would feel the agony of childbirth, while their champion alone would stand untouched. She bound the fate of a province to the breath of a woman at the edge of endurance, and the echo of it never left the hills. South and west there was a queen who did not care for echoes. Medb of Connacht sat beside her husband Ailil and measured her wealth against his with the kind of smile that shows teeth. Their accountants decided that Ailil owned one treasure that tilted the scales, a white-horned bull whose pride made the pasture itself seem vain. Med would match it with a brown bull from Cooley if charm and gold could do it, and with spear and fire if charm failed. She sent messengers with promises. She sent champions with threats. She sent a host that unrolled across valleys like a river breaching its banks. The brown bull of Cooley would be hers, and the Red Branch would learn humility. Ulster's warriors were struck by Match's old sentence just when the horns blew. They lay groaning along the walls, their strength turned to water. Cuchulainn alone could stand, a youth with a face that still knew laughter and a will that could turn iron into a second spine. He stood at a ford and took upon himself the burden of all single combat. He would fight one champion each day while the host advanced by inches. It was not bravado. It was the last clear path in a maze that had closed behind every other runner. On the first day he won by skill, on the second by cunning, and on the third by a rage that set his body into a state that polite company refuses to describe too closely. The poets use the old word ryastrad. The flesh seemed to rebel against the shape the world had given it, and the world stepped back in sensible fear. In quieter hours the boy showed mercy. He spared a youth whose life still held its own sun. He made bargains with men he admired, allowing them to pass if they would later send back a fair opponent. He met the Morrigan at the edge of the field, and she tried him with disguises and promises and threats, and he met each with a steady refusal to be led by flattery or fear. When he collapsed in blood and dust, there came a figure with the look of a father and the scent of the other world. Lug laid a hand upon him and poured rest through his bones until the world seemed possible again. At last fate brought Ferdiad to the ford, a friend crowned with honour and bound by duty to another queen. They embraced like brothers and then stepped apart as enemies. They fought all day and into a night that held its breath. They used every art they had learned at Scarthak's side, every feint known to men who have spent years trying to crack each other's guard for practice. The ford ran red. When dawn limped back to the sky, Cuchulainn understood that mercy had left him. He called his hidden spear by its secret path and ended the life he had once trusted with his own. He held Ferdiad and wept. His grief did not buy back an hour, but the island heard it and remembered. The tide of the raid turned from bright to bitter. Medb had her prize, but justice is a better accountant than any court treasurer. The brown bull met the white-horned bull in a fury that tore fences and shook walls. When they were finished, only one staggered back to Cooley, and even he did not live to see the next blossom on the blackthorn. The fields fell quiet, and the red branch rose at last from their sickness with faces that had been carved by pain. Ulster had survived, but nothing that had lived through that season could pretend to be the same. Cuchulainn stood in the doorway of his home, and Emer took his hands and said nothing, for there are victories that cannot be praised aloud. While warriors bent their heads in gratitude and silent shame, another tale in the north braided sweetness and sorrow into a cord that would pull kings from their seats. Concho Bar had planned to take as wife a girl not yet grown, named Deirdre, because the druids said her beauty would outshine any torch in the hall. They warned that she would be the ruin of Ulster. The king locked the warning away in the same place men keep knives they think they will never need. He set Deirdre apart and planned to claim her when the moon had made the right number of journeys. A girl with eyes like a storm's first light does not remain a secret. Deirdre saw a young warrior named Nawiz, one of the sons of Uisneach, and the world narrowed to a single path. The two fled with Noese's brothers to a cold coast across the sea where work is hard and love is the only song that makes the hours bearable. Conchobar sent Fergus to fetch them with a pledge of safe conduct. Fergus accepted the charge as a man accepts a cup at a wake. On the road back to Emain Macha, a crooked feast was spread, and Fergus found himself bound by an old guesting rule to stay and honour his hosts. He sent the sons of Uisnech on without him, as if fate had asked for a small misstep to make its larger stride. At the court, Deirdre and Noise saw treachery before it had fully taken off its mask. Swords were drawn, brothers fell. Noise died with his eyes still on the woman for whom he would have fought to see. Deirdre was taken to Conchobar, who had won nothing that a king should desire. For a year she sat in a hall where even the fire would not meet her gaze. Then, placed in the chariot of a man she despised, she threw herself out and met the stones with the ferocity of a will that would not be traded. Fergus, burned by shame, took his sword to Connacht. He became a pillar of Med's strength in later wars, and every strike he gave Ulster was a coin from the purse of that first betrayal. The North did not forget. The bards shaped Deirdre's name into a lament that mothers sang over sleeping infants, not to sadden them, but to remind them that beauty without kindness becomes a knife that cuts both ways. They shaped the deeds of Cuchulainn into lays a warrior could use to teach his hand how to hold a spear without letting it hold his soul. They told of Conchobar as both noble and flawed, for a nation needs truth more than flattery if it wishes to survive its own storms. They told of Macha until some men learned humility without suffering, which is the rarest kind. In time, Cuchulainn would meet his own end, lashed to a standing stone so that even death would not unman him. That belongs to a later telling. For now he moved through the island like a spark through tinder, leaving behind courage and unease in equal measure. When he walked into a hall, the air straightened its back. When he left, the benches took a breath as if they had been holding it without meaning to. Ulster had a champion, and champions are a blessing until they are a warning. Thus the Red Branch Age advanced with beauty at one elbow and tragedy at the other. The land grew rich in stories that did not excuse wrong but tried to understand it. The people learned to watch kings closely and to keep poets close as well, for a verse can sometimes do what a sword cannot. In every tale, a door in a green hill stood ajar, a reminder that another world continued its own feasts and councils beneath the roots of the hawthorn. The pact endured. The gods whispered like a tide among stones. The mortals raised sons and daughters who could listen when wind moved through barley. The human age learned quickly that a heart can open doors no key can touch. Love calls across water. Grief answers under stone. Between those calls, the island keeps a third silence, and that is the other world. It is not far away. It lies beneath a green hill, or beyond a thin mist, or on the other side of a wave that looks like all the others until you ride through it with courage and a promise. In this chapter the veils lift, and those who step through learn what the price of wonder truly is. It begins with a rider on a white horse crossing the tide like a bright thought that refuses to sink. Niamh of the golden hair came from Tir na Nog, where no one grows older and no sorrow can keep its footing. She wore the calm of an undying morning, Her gaze found Oisin, son of Finn, poet and hunter, whose words could turn a campfire into a court and a path of heather into a road of memory. She asked for him as one asks for a song that is already half in the room. He mounted behind her, and the horse stepped upon the sea as if the water had been taught by a gentle teacher to behave like a road. They came to a land where trees carried blossom and fruit at the same time, where music seemed to rise from the shadows like breath, and where laughter did not mock anyone who had been made to wait. Oisin hunted in woods that never failed, and recited verses that felt not so much composed as remembered from a time before time. There were feasts that tasted of joy more than of meat and salt. Niam smiled at him across long tables and in black glades where the light moved like silk. For 3 years he lived without a bruise on the heart. He could have lived 300 more and not noticed the difference. Yet home has its own gravity. One noon Oisin stood in a field where invisible bees sang, and he felt the pull of his father's laugh and the old talk of the Fianna at dusk. He wished to see Ireland again, if only for a visit. Niamh warned him with a love that knew too much about loss. She gave him the white horse and one clear instruction. He must not set his foot upon the soil of Ireland. As long as he stayed in the saddle, time would keep its distance. He promised as lovers promise when they mean it with all their might and do not know yet what the world will demand. The horse carried him across the sea and up the long green of Ireland. He looked for familiar faces. He found only stories. The halls of the Fianna were ruins, softened by moss. He asked where Finn had gone and where the companions had gone. Old men of a new faith told him that many years had flown since those names were alive on the wind. They asked him for his tale, for they loved the sound of wonder even when it came from a man with a stranger's radiance. He would have told it gladly, but he saw a group of farmers straining to move a stone that had no wish to be moved. Pity touched him. He leaned from the saddle to help. The girth shifted, the stirrup twisted. He fell. The ground received him with the indifference of the true world. Age struck like a winter. Flesh failed. Hair whitened. Hands that had drawn bows and touched immortal faces turned to parchment before the stone had been dragged a yard. They carried him to a saint whose book smelled of salt and whose speech held the new music of the faith that had taken root. Oisin, last voice of the old company, told of Finn and of bright hunts and of songs that had guided men like stars. The saint answered with patience, and the two men, each certain of a different kind of eternity, spoke without bitterness until Oisin's breath went thin as a reed. He closed his eyes upon a vision of a white shore and a rider whose golden hair would never grey. Ireland listened and knew in its bones that joy can be true and still be brief. If the story of Oisin is a poem woven of delight and regret, the tale of the children of Lear is a long cord held until the heart must change to hold it. Lear was a lord of the Tuatha who loved his first wife, Eob, with a tenderness that softened even the air around their house. She gave him a daughter and 3 sons whose laughter braided itself with bird song at the windows. When she died, the house had an echo where its centre had been. To comfort Lear and to keep that house from breaking, her sister Aoife married him. There are kindnesses that hide a wound. Jealousy rose in her like a slow tide. On a morning that smelled of hawthorn blossom, she took the children in her chariot and drove out to a lake as clear as a thought spoken honestly. She led them to the shore with gentle words, and then touched them with a charm that made the water shiver. Feathers grew where soft arms had been, bright eyes widened, now ringed with white. Voices broke into music that did not belong entirely to human throats. In a breath, they were swans. Their father came with his men and called their names, and 4 swans answered with voices that could break a stone without striking it. Heath's spell set terms that had the cruel neatness of a law written by someone who will never have to live under it. They would spend 300 years on Lough Derravara, 300 years on the Sea of Moyle, which lies like a hard thought between the north and the west, and 300 years among the rocks of Eris, where the Atlantic sharpens itself. They would keep their minds and their sorrow. They would sing to men who needed comfort and to waves that needed to be told they were not the only power in the world. So it was. Storms came with blunt hands. Winters arrived dressed in iron. Sailors lost and trembling heard a music that steadied them, and the swans watched them find their way and go on. The children told one another stories so that language would not loosen in their mouths. They kept a calendar of stars and a calendar of famous ships and a calendar of sorrows endured without surrender. When at last the years were spent, they found that the island no longer belonged to druids and old laws. A bell sounded from a small church on a headland like a single drop of light falling into a dark well. The spell broke with the sound of that bell, not by force, but by completion. The swans fell upon the shore as 4 frail old people who had outlived their own courage. A kind monk wrapped them in wool and baptized them with trembling hands. They lay together like fallen leaves and went where all endurance finally goes. The island keeps their graves and sometimes their song, for there are evenings when a wind from the north carries a music that seems older than birds or men and kinder than either when we forget ourselves. Love runs differently in the story of Diarmuid and Granny. Here desire steps forward in the full daylight of a court and chooses without asking permission. Finn Mac Cumhale was no longer a young captain. He had become the measured father of a people, a man who knew how to set camp, to judge quarrels, to pick a path through bog and bracken without losing a boot or a temper. The High King offered him his daughter, Gryne, a woman whose beauty did not make her patient and whose mind had no talent for resignation. Finn accepted because alliances are sometimes made with a nod and a calculation as much as with a kiss. At the betrothal feast, Gryne looked past the king and saw Diarmuid Ue Duibne, the best loved of the Fianna, whose brow bore a small mark that drew love like a magnet. She had been promised without being consulted. She chose to consult herself. She spoke a binding word over Diarmuid that his honor could not ignore. In that word she asked him to take her away. Duty pulled one way, love pulled the other. He lifted his eyes and found that they were already moving. They fled into a long twilight of flight and quiet meals and nights spent on giant stones that old people call beds because the lovers once slept there and asked the ground to remember. Angus, kind lord of the Boyne, hid them in a cloak of sleep when pursuers passed too near. The Fianna pursued under the orders of a man who was both leader and rival, guardian and offended bridegroom. Finn found them again and again and again and again. Some charm or act of respect opened a way out. A wild boar broke brush and made for diamweed in a place of standing wind. He killed it with the strength and skill that had made his name a comfort to children and a warning to bandits. Time as a way of demanding payment at the worst moment. Years later, on the slope of Ben Bulben, a monstrous boar rose where the light was thin. Finn was there, and so was Diarmuid, and so were all the old debts. The beast gored the younger man and left him spilling life upon stone. Finn had the gift to bring water that heals, if it is lifted by hands that have learned generosity. He walked to a stream with a face like a closed door. He returned without haste. He stood above Diarmuid and remembered old insult and new acceptances and the weight of leadership. Twice he brought only ordinary water. At last shame opened his hands. He came with the true draught, but the light had already gone out of the eyes that had once chosen Grine and a road that has no way back. In some tellings, Grine forgives the old hunter, and in others, she does not. Either way, the grass covers them all with the same calm. Finn remains the axle around which many tales turn, for he is a kind of answer to the question of what a good man might be when a good man cannot please everyone he must protect. He was not always venerable. He had a boyhood of hazard and wit. He tasted the salmon of knowledge when he burned his thumb on the cooking and put the thumb to his mouth as any sensible child does. Thereafter, when wisdom was needed, he placed that thumb between lip and tooth and thought as cleanly as a winter sky. He learned that a chief must be generous and brave and also teachable. He set tests for the Fianna that sounded like riddles and were nothing of the sort. Let no man be taken who cannot bend under a low branch and leap a high hedge and serve a guest before himself and compose a verse that does not lie. Under him the Fianna became both forest guard and court, a wandering nation of loyalty and song. They kept roads clear. They put out fires of feud with clean judgments. They hunted in winter not for sport alone, but to map the land of their charge. They carried harps as well as spears. At night they spoke of geese over Laugh Owle and of the way mist keeps the secrets of valleys without ever showing pride. Their enemies said they were vain. Their friends said they were necessary. Both were right, for no mortal company remains entirely one thing. In the end times of that company there was a battle at Gabra where young men fell and old friendships split like oak under a wedge. The age of kings in halls was advancing. The age of wandering courts was bending to a close. Finn's son Oisin lived to tell the stories to a new world. The pact between men and the children still held, though its doors were less often noticed. In this twilight of heroes, love and loss and wonder, walked together with the stately stride of companions who know that none can arrive without the others. The other world did not retreat. It learned to speak softly in places where men listen poorly. Lovers still find a glen where the air seems to know their names. A child still hears music from water and follows it to a lesson he will not forget. A mother still sets a bowl of milk upon the step for guests whose feet leave no mud and whose blessings outlast a bad winter. A poet still hears a line in the dark and wakes with a word that sets order upon a troubled day. The gods became smaller to the eye, which is not the same as saying they became smaller in truth. Thus the island holds a treasury of tales where joy is not cheap and sorrow is not a cancellation but a seal. Oisin and Neve teach that bliss without time cannot fully quiet the longing for home. The children of Lear teach that love can outlast cruelty and still accept an end with grace. Diarmuid and Greiner teach that desire remakes maps and that even a generous man can be slow where he should be quick. Finn and the Fina teach that wisdom is a habit, not a halo. Over all of it lies the green hush of the other world, not gone, not diminished, only waiting for a listener whose heart is ready to cross by means of attention alone.